why do you think we should bring in white South African farmers as opposed to maybe the Sudanese or the Myanmar refugees?
Well, as I explained on Sky News last night, much to the disgust of the bosses of Sky News, I said that my stance on immigration is really quite simple. I believe that we should take in only skilled workers, people who are going to contribute to this economy and not drain from it. And also people who are not too culturally dissimilar from us. So we're not going to clash with them religiously, culturally, or socially. The reason I think white South African farmers should have preference or should be brought into this country first, obviously, is because these are hardworking, culturally similar people. We're not going to have to worry about white farmers jacking cars, dealing drugs, fighting with police and robbing jewelry stores and so forth. These people are desperate to improve their prospects, desperate to get out of that country, which is actually planning to kill them and steal their property. The government is planning to do that to them. Not only would it be tremendously beneficial to our economy to bring in 1 million of these people in the next few years, but I believe we have some sort of a moral duty, a humanitarian duty to lend our assistance to these people. We can afford to do it. And that's why I believe these people would make would be an excellent contribution to our country.
Mm. And one reason that you sort of half touched on is that bringing them in, we could say to them, you can come in, but you can't have any welfare, and they probably still come over and contribute. Whereas people from Sudan and Middle Eastern migrants and the Myanmar tend to be a lot more likely to be on welfare when they come over as refugees. And it's like, okay, we're going to let people in and give them sanctuary, but then we're going to force taxpayers to pay for their living. I find taxation abhorrent in and of itself, but that's pretty horrendous, forcing people to do that. So anyway, I thought your answer was great. Did you want to follow up on that one?
Yeah, it's interesting why that answer that you've given and that you gave last night causes so much alarm for the left and even for like fake conservatives. Following on from what you were saying, Matty, if South Africans were to come to Australia, they're likely to vote for the Liberal Party. We often say that one of the reasons why the left like mass immigration is because they can bring people in who will likely vote for the left.
Yeah.
And it's another aspect of the left. They like to. It seems like we're in a stage of immigration now where the more culturally dissimilar to us they are, the better. It just means that they can virtue signal harder, and it means that they can shake up Australia even more. How do you feel about that?
It means we can be diverse, and therefore we can be stronger. Is the slogan rammed out, because diversity makes us strong. But diversity is derived from the word division, and literally in practice, diversity means a community divided based on race and culture. How does that make us stronger? Diversity, good, makes us stronger. Equality, equality, equality. You're not supposed to ask questions, but if you just think about it for 10 seconds, it's actually insane.
And it's like the picture. This is going to sort of ties into the next question that I'm going to ask you. Now, when people were sold the vision of multiculturalism, when I first remember it getting sold, we're multicultural. A lot of the multiculturalism was just basically, well, we're all going to be Australians, still Australians, but there's just going to have people from different ethnicities. But as we found out over the last sort of 20, 30 years, when different cultures do come over, or cultures that are extremely dissimilar to ours, they don't tend to integrate and become Australian if there's too many of them. If there's a few, and they can integrate over 1 or 2 generations, but if there's a lot of them, as there has been, they tend to not integrate. So this diversity does become division in a cultural sense, and it almost seems like in a geographical sense as well, given what we saw in Lakemba with Lauren Southern. And if you look around Melbourne, there are definitely ethnic enclaves forming. There are suburbs of just Vietnamese people and just Chinese people and just Hong Kong, just people like Cantonese people mainly, which I believe Box Hill is mainly Cantonese. So it's like, you know, you've got this diversity, which is apparently our strength, but we seem very, very divided as a result.
Sure, and you can't encourage or extract from people, bring to the surface qualities which were never present in the first place. And I think people, particularly the people in charge of these immigration policies, these dreamers, they fail to acknowledge the correlation between race and culture, which is something which is not talked about ever, generally speaking. And I believe there's a great deal of evidence, obvious evidence, that if you change the race, you change the culture. That when another race adopts a culture or tries to take it on board, it's always going to influence it to a certain degree based on its own ethnic personality. And I think if we're going to try to ethnically change who we are, we're not going to retain the same culture. And I don't know if anyone had the information, all of the information about what was really happening to this country in terms of the ethnic shift it's supposed to accept unquestionably. I don't think they would accept it. I think because people are ignorant and not politically engaged, I think that's what this whole equality, multiculturalism relies on. So long as you have a politically disengaged populace, you're not going to get any serious understanding or resistance against it. But as soon as people are informed and aware of what's going on, they'll oppose it. So I think maybe that's the reason such great lengths, or the media goes to such great lengths to shut people like me down, because I'm so good at informing and alerting people.
Well, that's why they shut down Pauline Hanson back in the late 90s. Like, she got 1 million votes in her first election with One Nation. And that's 1 million votes, 1 million people voting for an anti-immigration party. Those million people
making those votes, voting for Pauline Hanson, could be seen as collectively as an expression of the will for self-preservation or collective self-preservation.
Yeah. That's a really good way of putting it. Even if it's not articulated clearly, like, that's what it's about. Yeah.
So that leads on to the question I will ask you. To someone who had never heard of it before, how would you describe multiculturalism?
Well, you've got to be very careful with people in the beginning, especially people who are not typically comfortable in any sort of conversation, political conversation, especially about these quote unquote sensitive topics. If you're going to try to change someone's mind and make them realize that multiculturalism is not a good thing, and it's going to result in either chaos or our ethnic disappearance, at least from this land, you need to go very slow, because the same time it took to convince them that multiculturalism may be good, it's going to take at least the same amount of time to convince them that it might not be good as well. So I think people often come to despair quite quickly or easily when they don't get a positive reaction out of people when they're trying to convince them that maybe multiculturalism is not that great. But don't expect people to change so suddenly. What would I say exactly? I would probably, the most effective method in my experience is to draw attention to the hypocrisy and the double standards of the kind of people promoting multiculturalism. Draw attention to the fact that you can only actually be deemed a racist if you're white. But if you're black or brown or Asian, no one's calling you a racist, no one's holding you up for or pulling you up for racism. Same is true for sexism. You're only sexist if you're a male. These are the things that first alerted me to the general hypocrisy and double standards of this dogmatic, or this dogma, this ideological dogma when I was in school, when I was in high school. I was always accused of racism and sexism, and I had classmates of different ethnicities, and I realized that these people were racist and sexist all the time, but they were never accused of those things. So, yeah, probably that's the way I'd go about it.
If follow up to that, this is a question I wanted to ask at some stage. It's a good time to. So, like, Maddie's asked you, like, how would you describe multiculturalism, which is something that we strongly oppose. On the other hand, like, how would you go about describing and sort of, like, if you're talking one-on-one with somebody who, as you say, like, might need a little bit of time just to come around to the idea. How would you talk to them about nationalism, specifically about ethnic nationalism? Because it's a question I get asked a lot of the time. And in my writing, like, I articulate it and I keep coming up with ways, like verbally articulating it. It's still something I'm working on. I always try to sort of look at it in terms of, I see the nation as an extension of the family. And so I love my nation and the people who are ethnically similar to me, culturally similar to me, as I love them in the same way that I love my family.
Sure. Nationalism, I believe, is an ideology which is kind of like a human way of understanding nature.
Mm-hmm.
It's linked in with nature. So use natural examples, examples of animals and the different subspecies within the green kingdom of nature, and how they only mate and sort of join with and hang with members of their own subspecies, specific subspecies. Even Muhammad Ali says it perfectly when he says that even though we have birds, there are many different subspecies within that race, with many different and varying cultures. And sometimes the smallest difference in DNA can result in enormous differences in biological structure.